Truck 1, ambulance 1, medic 1, showing all units en route to
Dispatch ambulance 7, St. Mary's code 3 was on.
Welcome to Going Interior, a podcast about doing hard jobs and living life well. I'm your host, Jamie Kavanaugh, Captain Paramedic and Peer Support Team Coordinator at the Grand Junction Fire Department. My guest today is Lindsay Mauer. Lindsay is an exercise physiologist, licensed massage therapist, certified kinesiotaping practitioner, and functional movement specialist. She holds additional certifications in nutrition, coaching, mindfulness, fitness, and soft tissue modalities. She also owns Brave HR, an employee health and well-being and safety consultancy firm. So, Lindsay, thank you so much for being here. Awesome to have you.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm thrilled, like a little nervous, but I'm thrilled.
Well, a little nervous. Let's talk about unique stressors that you've worked with first responders before, too.
Yes.
So you have worked even with our first responders. So what kind of unique stressors do they face? And then we'll kind of talk about how we can overcome some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's interesting to take a look at first responder stress and the first responder stress continuum, which we can kind of talk about, as we move through our session. And I think with my hands, you're going to see a lot of gesturing. For the audio listeners, gesturing.
She's gesturing a lot, just so you know.
And I think it's really important to consider these individuals because these are human beings, in various levels of adulthood who are dealing with all of the things that most adults are dealing with, that standard amount of stress, right? The family relationships, friendships, marriages, or, relationships of any sort, kids, those types of things. And those are all stressful just for anybody to deal with. But then we take a first responder, somebody that's in the fire service, and we add things. And I think it's really important to understand before we dive into the stressors is to understand a little bit more about how people in the fire service are typically wired. They're wired in a different way than a lot of individuals. Most of us are not willing to run into a burning building to save the life of someone else. Like, it's unfortunate, but it's true. And those of us that choose that career are wired in a special way. They typically have a really high protective nature. And that protective nature reflects also in having a want for control, as well as a want for kind of framework and structure and those different types of things. And so we take that individual and we add life stressors to them, and then we shove them into a very uncontrolled situation in their job. And it can be anything from, the uncontrolled scenario of being in a firehouse with people that they don't know. That's a social stressor right there, all the way through the things that we're very familiar with, in dealing with things on the fire ground of assessment and loss of life and injuries and those types of things. And so it adds a certain level of stress, sort of exacerbation to these individuals in a lot of different ways. Most of us are not prepared to see those things. Doesn't mean, like, if you chose the fire service, it doesn't mean that you are prepared to see those things. And your sense of control, your sense of protectiveness is being challenged, when those situations don't go right. So when we're dealing with stress, we're dealing with all of those different types of things in addition to a person that is going to struggle with not having control of their situation. So stress is unique in the public safety and fire service world for all of those reasons. I think what really got me to start thinking about these things is when I saw for the first time the first responder stress continuum. And it made so much sense to me because the stress continuum is sort of an image. Think about it like a stoplight. We have our green, which is like a person that's at the ready, like they have a sense of mission and control, like they're feeling really, really good. We have a person that's yellow, which is just a little bit, elevated in their stress response. These are the people that are a little jumpier, that it might, come into action a little bit sooner than those of us, that are in our green zone. We have orange, which are people that have received like a kind of cognitive injury, if you will, by tiny little stressors that have just added up and haven't been dealt with. And then we have people that are red. These are the people that we really need to address because they are essentially in a state of post-traumatic stress, where they aren't able to cope with the things that they're dealing with at work, but they're also not able to cope with the things that they're dealing with at home. And that's that's when life becomes really overwhelming. And what's really helped me in understanding and dealing with first responders and people in the fire service is most first responders are in yellow all the time. And they have a very difficult time going green. So, for example, we're in this room, we're, doing this cool podcast thing. But if the fire alarm went off, my guess is that you would know exactly where the entrances and exits are. You would be out of your chair faster than I could even blink my eye because you're yellow and I'm green. And so that adds a certain level of stress all the time to the first responder, even in more relaxing scenarios. So I think it's important that we understand that first and then kind of dive in, to how we mitigate this stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I think a lot of people listening to this will feel themselves some point along that continuum. And hopefully some people can relax a little more, especially on their days off. But I see that some of us even will seek, hey, it's my day off. I don't feel like I can relax, especially right after a shift, 48 hours of intense activity. You don't just go home and fall asleep. For a lot of us, that's really challenging. It might be, I need to go do something to tire myself out or be even more stressed for a while.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go for a mountain bike ride. Then maybe I can sleep, something of that nature.
Absolutely. And so when we talk, and I'm so glad you said that because, we talk about these individuals who like control. They have a high protective nature. They want to deal with the feelings that they're feeling. And they do it in a couple of different ways. And it doesn't really necessarily allow them a true recovery or a down regulation because really what we're looking at when it comes to stress response in any case is a battle between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Our sympathetic nervous system is the one that tells us to go. It's the one that kicks in when our kid runs out into the street or the one that kicks in when the call comes in and you're ready to, you need to get going. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system is the one that tells you to stop and calm down. And a lot of times what we find in fire service individuals is an overdrive of the sympathetic nervous system, which doesn't allow them to kind of downregulate unless they really actively try to. And so here we have this person that might be in sympathetic overdrive. They have a high protective nature, so they don't want to go home and tell their spouse or their loved ones about what they've seen.
Sure.
They're protecting those individuals from that. They do want to deal with their stress, but the only way that they really know how to add control to that scenario is to, exercise intensively or do something else that, like you said, is still stressful. So I think it's really important, too, that, we talk about this topic and we teach individuals how to downregulate themselves so that they don't keep themselves in a steady state of stress all the time.
It's interesting. It sounds like what I hear you saying is that we have these attributes that make us really good at our job, potentially, but also don't serve us for the other 95% of life, really.
Absolutely.
So it's that downtime at the station, then it's going home to your family, those sorts of things. We train all these things to be really good in that time of emergency, and that's 99.9% of our training comes down to that. But then it's that other 95% of actual life, and that might just be interacting with each other, going to the grocery store, being with our family, that these things and being on edge don't necessarily serve us that well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, how do we train then, how do we make recovery, real recovery, down regulation of the sympathetic nervous system as high of a priority as ramping it up and, teaching that same sort of muscle memory, if you will, in, down regulation versus up regulation. So I think it's an important topic. Yeah, absolutely.
Nice segue. And you have all these different modalities. So where do we even start?
I know,
Nutrition,
right?
Fitness, recovery. Where do we start?
Absolutely. So, I like to, now that we kind of understand the individual and we know that they're living in that yellow state, steady state pretty much all of the time, I like to talk about just sustainable ways, ways that we can build in a little bit more effectively without being overwhelming. Because, I'm an enormous fan of the wellness podcasts and all of those types of things that are out there. But I think sometimes they can be detrimental, right, to a person's mental health because all of a sudden we're supposed to cold plunge and open our eyes to the sun and do all of these different types of things, which I'm sure have lovely effects on the body, but who has time, right? And so I'm hoping that, we can talk about sustainable ways, easy ways to downregulate the body for first responders. So it's going to lie in all the traditional realms. Like the advice that I have is going to lie in those traditional realms of, nutrition and sleep and movement and relaxation. But I have some sort of specifics in mind that I think will be really helpful. The first one is nutrition. And I mean nutrition like kind of specifically right after a call or like during your shift.
Okay.
You can do this anytime, but there are certain nutrients in our food that can help us down-regulate the sympathetic nervous system. Examples of that include, B vitamins and magnesium, looking for antioxidants like vitamins A, D, and K, eating foods with those things in it. And it's really simple because those things all live in the foods that, are best for you. That means, your leafy greens, your nuts and seeds and those types of things. Now, I do want to recognize that stress is a huge contender in emotional eating. And I don't want to downplay the emotional eating because we need it. There is a sense of, I always joke when I eat a donut, that it's for my mental health.
Right.
And it is, I enjoy that. And so, if there is a time, you come back from a really stressful call and you just need something that is not full of antioxidants and rich in, non-inflammatory things, then by all means, grab that Oreo or have that moment with yourself, but also try to consider those nutrients, in the time that you're at the station. Try to have, at least one solid meal of good, healthy nutrients that'll kind of bring down that sympathetic nervous system to its more steady state.
So not hamburgers, fries, and ice cream for dessert?
If you want to, you guys are on a longer shift, but build in those other ones that are, are a little bit more nutrient dense, because the camaraderie that comes from a really good meal is also an enormous way to sort of deal with the stressors that come along with this position. And so the grilling outside, that camaraderie, those types of things are also really, really important. But consider that, consider maybe snacking on a, handful of walnuts prior to, having that moment with your buddies and with your crewmates on, having a more inflammatory meal, I guess, if you will, or a more indulgent meal, let's say that. Because those nutrients are proven to get into the body and start to downregulate that nervous system and just provide sort of a soothing balm, if you will, to the body and the brain to tell it it's okay to downregulate, at least downregulate to the part that, or the point that you feel comfortable when you're at work.
Interesting. How long does this take? And people are asking one meal,
Sure.
I think we're so used to kind of instant gratification from eating. That's how we feel immediately after. But thinking 2, 3, 4, 5 hours afterward is kind of a different way of looking at food, right, than we traditionally do.
Absolutely.
Could this help me feel better longer?
Yeah, it's funny, interesting, and it's a great question because nutrition is chemistry. It's pretty immediate when it comes to the nutrient piece. But your question, I think, has two components, right? There's a habit component, and consistency is key with nutrition. It has a very cumulative effect. But at the same time, that immediate blast of anti-inflammatory and antioxidant type nutrients does have a pretty quick effect, because as the body digests it, it releases those nutrients into the bloodstream, and they can be utilized in the ways that the body needs, which if you are in kind of a chronic sympathetic overdrive, that's what the body's going to see, that magnesium and that, vitamin B and those types of things, and be oh, I need to apply it here. Our body is extraordinarily intuitive and will typically take the nutrients that we need to the thing that we need. The most.
It's interesting you're talking chemicals and hormones and stuff like that too, and there's a lot of research now that's saying our gut is part of our brain, right? There's things that are similar to neurons in our digestive tract and gut.
Absolutely.
So we're actually, by digesting or putting harmful foods into our body, that's I don't know, putting drugs into my brain, just that direct path almost, where I don't think we've really considered that in the past. It's been I might be overweight, I might, maybe not feel as good, but just in this really I don't know, kind of, not really contextualized way, where that research, if we really absorb it, it's wow, that is potentially pretty impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. Because my exercise physiologist brain, physiologists basically study everything that happens in the body when it relates to exercise, or essentially a stress response. That's kind of that's the specialty that I live in. And so removing a lot of the like kind of trendiness. Like I understand science, and the science would say, yes, there is a kind of area of our digestive tract known as the little brain, and it is an enormous player in how our overall like health is. And so if we're fueling it with things that are not the greatest, we will operate in the same way. Like I always talk about nutrition in a way, like if you have a performance car and you put junky fuel in it, it's going to give you junky performance. Whereas if you have a performance car and you put performance fuel in it, it's going to give you the highest level of performance that it can. Or if you want to think about it like a pet, like if we all have a lot of us have a pet at home, and like we do the research, we look into the food that we feed them, we try to make sure that they are as well taken care of as possible. Why we're not doing that for our own bodies baffles me. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way or in a kind of, looky down way, because I absolutely love crunchy Cheetos and like cookies and those things. Like I indulge in those things, but at the same time, I know that I do it with awareness because I know I'm going to feel a little junky later after I eat it. So for people in this realm, your body's like, you're essentially professional athletes, but in a different realm, right? And we need you as a society to function as best as you can. And so it's a delicate balance between like fueling appropriately and as fully as you can and balancing your mental health. And so that's why I encourage you, like, you have the donut if it makes you feel better, but then like be thoughtful for the rest of your meals. Try to build those things in, to help downregulate and keep you going in your shift.
Yeah. And I think that comment about professional athlete is interesting. So take Tom Brady was like the oldest football player in a while, right? And he had his own professional chef and everybody helping curate all these things. But he played till he was like 44, 45. Just saying, like, I'm trying to go 10 years at least past that, So it's also this, like, we're hoping for this supreme longevity as a professional athlete to think we can eat Oreos and milkshakes and be professional athletes till we're 55. Like that's going to be tough, It's
absolutely.
going to be really challenging.
And I think it's all about moderation, like nobody, like you shouldn't live off of those things. But again, if you deprive yourself of them, you're way more likely to feel that feeling of deprivation and maybe even binge on them later. Yeah. So, nutrition is a long-term relationship. Like it is something that we have to think about in very long term, because we can't, that's how we build sustainable things, is if we think about them in the long term. Long term, it doesn't make sense for you to never have your favorite junk food. Like, what is living then if you're never going to have it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
But the long term, like, kind of relationship that you can have is like you have it every once in a while with an awareness, right? That the rest of your meals are going to be as on point as possible. Like I love the idea of like the 80-20 or the 90-10 rule, 80% of the time, like you're doing the best that you can, or 90%. And then you give yourself that leeway to be human, 10 to 20% of the time as well. Just kind of knowing like it's a flat road. There's no cliff on either side. When it comes to nutrition, like you can veer over to one side and have that indulgent meal, and then you can veer back over to the other side and you can actually take healthy nutrition to a detrimental level, right? For your body and your brain, if you're overthinking it and stressing about it. Sure. Where we want you to be is in the middle, just kind of practicing that balance.
Yeah. Oh, very nice. Thank you. All right. Where do we go? I mean, there's a million different things I could ask you about even from that, but can we go to fitness next?
Yeah.
And just how that ties in? Because I like this mindset of a little bit of moderation, because I think we're going to talk about a lot of extremes and,
Absolutely. Yeah. So fitness is, again, that sort of long-term relationship. It's a balance, because, as firefighters, you need to have a modicum of fitness, right? Like you need to be able to move your body and carry heavy things and get low and climb stuff and do all of those different types of things. So that's where, like, your high intensity exercise does come into play as being useful. But when we're talking about stress, what's really interesting when we study stress is that the body doesn't differentiate between stressors. Like it has no idea what is stressing it out. It just knows that the sympathetic nervous system is starting to ramp up, and that is the fight or flight, right? So it's trying to figure things out. So it can have the same stress response to a call. You're going out, you're doing the things that you need to get done to protect our community. But at the same time, it'll have that same stress response to your high intensity interval training workout.
Sure.
Because it's still like, oh, something's going on, and it sends all of its, stress hormones essentially out into the body to deal with whatever stressor is coming along the way. It has no idea what's causing it. It doesn't really care. It's going to handle it in the same way. So it's interesting that you mentioned, dealing with stress, sort of burning off steam is a common practice, right? Like you get home and you're like, I just need to like go for like a fast run or, do a high intensity interval training workout. I need to like cleanse my mind. Like I need to wear myself out essentially so that I feel a little bit decompressed. The problem with that practice is that it's just carrying on the stress that is coming from that shift. And I'm guilty of it too. Like I like to handle my stress with, like nobody goes for like a long and easy run when they're stressed. Like you typically tempo, you run quick, you do whatever it is that you need to do to kind of wear yourself out. Fatigue though does not equal stress management. It just equals fatigue. So when I think about fitness, again, it's that balance. Like we need that strength training. We need that high intensity. We need our, firefighters to be in fantastic shape as much as possible. But at the same time, we need them to downregulate. And so my recommendation is low impact exercise on your shift and for at least a day afterward. And I know that sounds a little crazy because it's really common to like get into the gym at the firehouse and like push hard as a team. And there is a certain, again, camaraderie and importance to that. But at the same time, maybe we should consider shifting to that more low impact because it doesn't stir up our sympathetic nervous system. So the low impact would be anything that is easy on the joints and keeps the heart rate like relatively low. It doesn't mean that you need to do yoga or just stretch or what have you. It just means that you need to dial back the intensity to probably like a 40% of that like RPM of 1 to 100. So you're working at like 40% or less of like what you would, of your max effort essentially in these workouts. Again, that's going to keep the sympathetic nervous system sort of happy and at bay. It's going to maybe like take a look and like raise its head, like the dog in our entryway that's like, what was that noise? But it's not going to like get itself all fired up because you're not asking it to do anything crazy, which allows the parasympathetic nervous system to continue to be in play, therefore down regulating those things.
And then doing a more intense workout
any other time.
3 days after shift. Since we have these 4-day stretches off, you're doing it in between.
Absolutely. So you kind of gain your fitness in that window, and then you practice your down regulation or your kind of real recovery at the time that you're on shift and for a day afterward.
Yeah. Okay. This is a huge paradigm shift, I feel like.
I know, right?
Myself included, like I exercise so I can sleep. A lot of times. And I think I'm learning some of these skills, but I want to hear from you, like what else do we do? Because I think a lot of people would say like, that's what I do so that I can decompress. Like I work out hard. I, do these things so that I can wind down. And it just feels really counterintuitive to say, I'm going to go really easy and just focus on this, not keying my nervous system over and over and over again, which is probably, 20 years of doing this stuff. For me, like it's been keyed so many times that it would be a very large shift to say, you're not going to do those things while you're doing this job. You're going to, go slow and low kind of thing. All right, how do we down-regulate then if we're not, we've eaten good food. We're only going 40%.
Yep.
We need some other skills then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that you mentioned sleep because that's a really hot button topic, right? And when it comes to exercise and its relationship to sleep, it's still the same story. That high intensity activity is actually spurring adrenaline and getting your sympathetic nervous system going to where you won't be able to sleep as effectively as you would if you kept it low impact. So the more you can keep your parasympathetic nervous system, your down-regulated nervous system in play, the better you'll sleep, or at least the faster you can fall asleep. So using exercise, again, like fatigue and exhaustion, to force sleep will work, but it doesn't allow your brain to get into the like cycles that it needs to get like actual rest. And sleep, like I said, I know it's a hot button topic, and funny to hear from a person that I've had my sleep, disrupted by my kids, but never by my profession, not really. And so I try to be sort of as realistic as possible when it comes to this type of thing, because it would be easy for me to tell you to do all these like practices and these things and, get yourself into this mode. But the reality is like, you probably won't. Like your sleep patterns are kind of what they are. My recommendation is to, avoid a huge amount of high intensity exercise right before you're trying to go to sleep. Foam roll, which we can talk about here in a minute, because that's another way to kind of down regulate. And then create as much of a habit as possible. Like try not to look at your phone if you can avoid it. You can listen to something, but try not to introduce that light, because it doesn't allow for the melatonin stimulation to occur to actually get you to go to sleep. And then in the daytime, and this is where my biggest, I think, most sustainable tip kind of comes into play, is practice the safety nap. I don't, and this comes into culture, of course, at the firehouse as well. And as a captain, I'm sure you understand that culture. Like, you have to support it for them. Like, permission is power, right? Sure. But to allow for like a 10 to 30 minute nap, limit it at 30 minutes, because it gives you the most essentially restful part of the sleep cycle in that first 10 to 30 minutes. If you go past it, you'll wake up groggy and feel kind of cranky. But in that 10 to 30 minutes, like, you get a really restful bout of sleep. And it really helps to help you function kind of throughout the rest of the shift. So if you can encourage that in your, firehouse culture, that the 10 to 30 minutes, like, safety nap is okay, then I would do it. Because the reason why we call it the safety nap is that it, again, is so restful, so it's recommended for people who drive long distances. It's recommended for people who work nights if they can, and so on, because it allows you to keep your level of alertness upon waking. Like, if you were to get a call and you were in in that time frame, like, you could wake up really quickly and be ready to go. But it also allows the body to kind of tolerate that broken or restless sleep, if you will.
Sure.
But don't stress about it. Don't stress about sleep, because it's not worth your time. Just try your best to keep a routine. Don't ramp yourself up prior to trying to go to sleep, and use a safety nap as a good tool in your toolbox.
I like it. All right. How do we recover then once we do all this hard work and stuff like that?
So essentially, these are all steps in recovery, right? Like, you're recovering from the call.
How many steps are we going to have?
So we do our low impact exercise. We try to have like a healthy snack. We, try to do a safety nap if we can. Another like trick that I like to use is foam rolling. I know I mentioned it before. Foam rolling is so fascinating. So it's self-myofascial release. It's working with like the muscle spindles basically in the body. But the way that it stimulates the nervous system is fascinating. And I could go forever on this and probably bore all of the listeners, but so I won't do that. But what's important to know about foam rolling is that it essentially tells the parasympathetic or the sympathetic nervous system that to like go away. Like, it doesn't go away, but it tells the sympathetic nervous system that it's okay to rest, and it wakes the parasympathetic up. So it's one of the more powerful sort of like mechanical ways to actually downregulate the body. So if we remove, the chemistry that's involved with nutrition, and we remove the sort of hard to achieve sleep, questions and that type of thing, foam rolling is actually really helpful at down regulating the body. And so if you are struggling, like you're in your room at the, fire station, and you're like, I cannot sleep. Like, I am just, go grab a foam roller and do it in the dark. Or in a very dim room. Foam roll big muscles, so like, legs, those different types of things, because you get the most amount of like that muscle spindle action that's going to tell the sympathetic nervous systems what to do. and spend 15 minutes doing that and then lay back down. And I bet you fall asleep a lot faster.
Interesting.
It's fascinating.
Okay. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, whenever my kids have a hard time sleeping, I make them foam roll. They think I'm insane, but it always helps them.
Well, it's nice to have something to do too with your mind and body. I think that's not vigorous. I'm sure everybody who does this profession has had this experience where you've had a number of calls at night and you're like, do I even try to go back to sleep right now? It's 3:00 in the morning. I've been up a number of times. It's just challenging. And the more times you're up at night, the more challenging it is. It's just a thing. So I'm going to try it. I have never done that in the middle of the night.
Absolutely. Yeah, try it. And you can do it in your room or in just like a dimly lit space. Like if you really feel like you're going to have to like get going again, you don't want to lay back down. Like, again, that's the nature of your job, right? Like that's the nature of what we're dealing with. And so don't, again, because you don't want to stress about the sleep. Like the worst part to try to sleep is if you're laying in bed stressing about how you're not sleeping. So action. To get the foam roller out and like don't lay back down if you don't want to. But try to downregulate in any other way that you can. I think that's really key.
How about decompressing throughout the day, that sort of thing too? So you're running in our job, and probably a lot of jobs, you have these areas of intensity followed by a little, potentially a time for winding down.
Sure.
But what we do is probably grab our phone, go to the television, whatever.
Sure.
Something that isn't necessarily relaxing. Would it be helpful to do that throughout the day so we don't get to 10 o'clock at night, all of a sudden shut off your phone and like, okay, now I'm going to try to sleep, immediately. Is it going to work?
It'll take some time for sure. Yeah, no, I think, these are all things that like can't hurt. So why not like give them a try, throughout the day? Like a foam roll, like you can't really over foam roll.
Okay.
A low impact activity, like I wouldn't do it all day, by any means, but like you could build like little spurts of low impact activity in kind of throughout the day, focus on like when you have more control, like focus on like your healthy snacks, maybe make those your kind of anti-inflammatory things instead of the meals that the group decides to have together. Those are all ways to kind of build it in, throughout the day. And I'm not saying that like you should never look at your phone or watch TV because a mindless activity, again, has its benefits where we can just check out. But, go into it with an awareness. Like maybe not look at social media because most of that stresses most of us out. So maybe save that for like a different time. Watch like a favorite movie, like something that you really love, or, spend some time like doing whatever it is that you might want to do that will de-stress you, that'll keep your stress level low on your phone. But then follow that up, maybe limit it to like 15 minutes and then go foam roll for 15 minutes or, spend that time with yourself really checking in. Because all of these activities are also great ways to connect the mind and body again. Activities on screens are not, like those are great ways to check out, which we all need. But the food, the, low impact activity, the foam rolling, those are great ways to check in. And really ask yourself, like, how am I doing? Because it's, one thing to ask, like, how are you doing? But it's another thing to lean in and be like, how are you really doing? Like, what do you need? Because I think that's a really important question.
You've mentioned this a number of times, being mindful of this, that, or the other. What does that mean?
So mindfulness is so funny because it's a really buzzy word, right? Like people are like, you need to have mindfulness. But like, what is it? Yeah, everybody's like, well, what?
How do I do that? Yeah.
And I like to really downplay it because it's really nothing more than like having situational awareness. But situational awareness with like a vein of appreciation.
Okay.
Is how I like to put it, So like I'm aware of my space, I know various things. Like you probably know more again, because you live in a different place likely on that stress continuum than I do. But like, I appreciate, like I like the fuzzy nature of our fancy velvet tablecloth. Like that's nice, like it's, I appreciate that. Like, so that's really what mindfulness is. Like you can find it in any capacity. It doesn't require anything special. But what it does and why it's so important is that it connects your mind and body again. In our world of screens, it's easy to check out into the world that's on our screen and not really pay attention to the world that's here with us, right? Everybody's had that moment where you try to talk to somebody who's looking at their phone and it's like they have no idea that you're even there. And that means that they've kind of checked out. Like, and that's, again, it's okay. There's no judgment there by any means, but mindfulness draws back into the self and allows you to really assimilate the world around you and appreciate it. So it's as simple as, like, again, admiring the velvet tablecloth, going out and like listening to like the sound of like leaves on the trees, which is hard now in Colorado in wintertime. But, it's really about situational awareness with a vein of appreciation, if that answers your question, or gratitude even.
Yeah. Well, I like that. We can certainly get down with situational awareness. That's something we learn about from day one. But I think taking a different, whether it's police or firefighters, we're looking for like these bad scenarios, scene safety, stuff like that. Like what could be bad about this scenario versus what's great about this scenario. And that's where maybe that our job is potentially dysfunctional for that other, large portion of not work time that I was talking about versus like, can we flip that script when we're not on a call? Okay, I'm still situationally aware. I'm not just going to numb myself or, just completely check out, and maybe I can stay aware and maybe look, like you're saying, look for some good stuff, I guess.
Absolutely.
It's all around us for sure.
Yeah, and you can even use it, mindfulness then will sharpen your ability, as you're reading, like a scene or something like that as well, because you get so much more aware of like the small detail that's in your world. It's so fascinating, and it is a practice. And the reason why we call it that is you have to practice it. Like it's not something that you're just automatically able to do. And it sounds a little crazy, but you can find that positivity even in a bad scenario. Like, for example, like, is the entrance to that structure, is it good? Awesome. Like, is it a nice, clean entrance? Like, okay, like, I'll take it. You know what I mean? Or like, whatever it is everybody already out of the house?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Like, I just have to deal with the structure then. Like, whatever it might be, positive.
Yeah.
And that really helps to keep your mind in check to where you can shift into that down-regulated state a lot more easily than if you just focus on the stressful things.
Okay.
And it's easy for me to say. Again, I'm an eternal optimist and pie in the sky. But at the same time, like, why not?
I can see it. I mean,
why not take a moment to consider that?
I didn't step in dog poop on the way to this house.
Yes.
No one's, fighting me as I try to access this patient. Like, this is great.
It's a great time. I have this like mission or this drive to create a better world of work, because work doesn't have to be miserable, and it can be, and that means for everybody, and really like for myself and my peers that are working currently, but also like to leave that legacy for my kids. Like I want them to enjoy work. I want them to ask for what they need. I see company culture ideally as a like kind of a lava lamp, where like you're getting information and resources from your leadership, but you also live in a culture that's transparent enough that you can ask for what you need if it's not there. And then all of those things happen in the middle to create this like beautiful, moment of working together. And I think, working in government, is a very humble but noble job. And doing what I do in government for wellness and safety is I'm filling the cup of all the people that take care of the community that I love. And I think that's really important. So if I can overflow that cup and fill theirs up, and their friends up and everything like that, then it maybe will ripple out to create beautiful communities all across the world. So again, eternal optimist.
Very nice.
But that's the drive.
That's amazing. What have we missed?
I think finally, when we talk about stress, like don't stress about it, right? Like it's not worth stressing about. All of these practices and recommendations that we've sort of chatted about are only sustainable if they work for you. So, take a few and try them. If they don't work out, take a few other ones and try those. You don't have to implement all of them.
Sure.
You certainly don't have to implement any of them if you don't want to, if you already have like a pretty good process. So it's not turnkey, take these things, use them as you will, but don't stress out about them. Know that, we live in a culture that's so full of information that can be actually really detrimental. And so sometimes we just have to go back to the basics and ask ourselves what we need and then kind of go from there, if you will. So I think that's the kind of final, thing that I would recommend is don't stress about it.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you for a book recommendation, a movie recommendation, but maybe we just need to turn all that stuff off and go inside ourselves for a while. That's
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we can I completely agree. I think that you can find most of your solutions, like the answers to what you need, by turning back within to yourself and asking your body what it needs. Like it'll typically tell you. It's typically been telling you for like a good long while, but we haven't paused enough to really listen. Like we live in this, again, it's a wonderful culture of information. I mean, we have everything that we could possibly need at our fingertips, but I find that can be detrimental in a lot of cases because it's too overwhelming. One book will tell you one thing and the other book will contradict that thing, and it's exhausting. So I think if you haven't already built like a pretty solid relationship with like yourself and a good mind-body connection, I would start there. And then after you get that done, like if you feel like you're pretty good, like you're, in that green zone of the stress continuum, maybe edging on yellow, but like still pretty green, then, start looking for things that serve you. What is a book that's going to uplift you, that's going to not add things to your to-do list to where, your morning routine is 2 hours long before you can even like do anything. What type of information is that going to be? So it varies for everyone.
Just in general, with where you're at, like what kind of stuff everybody's ingesting some kind of information,
Sure.
right? Just going through the world right now. What do you do personally? Like, what are you reading? Are you looking at the news? Are you listening to podcasts, stuff like that? Or do you feel like you do spend more quiet time than the average person?
I spend definitely more quiet time than the average person. It freaks my husband out because he's very social and he's very driven and like he likes to read those books and do those things, but it serves him. Whereas I'm very comfortable in being alone and reflective. And I really try to take that into account when I recommend it because it wasn't always that way. Like, it took me like probably at least a good solid year of actively working on not ingesting information before I really like stopped. So I don't really watch the news. I figure if it's important enough, it'll get to me. I think I don't do a lot of like personal development reading. I do a lot more journaling, and that type of thing. I do try to read maybe 1 or 2 books a year, mostly in conversation and listening and leadership, because I think the better listener I can become, the more helpful I can be to other people, because our society really truly doesn't listen, I don't think, all that effectively. So that's where I typically focus my personal and professional development, is in that connectedness of working with other people. But most of the time I read like mystery books. Like nice. I love mystery novels.
There you go.
So I spend my time doing that. I spend my time outside. I don't try to tax my morning routine with overly taxing things, I guess,
Sure.
like, because there's so many things you can do. So like, I don't cold plunge unless I'm in nature, and then I might, because it's fun, like it's experiential.
Yeah.
Just turning your shower cold is not enjoyable, although I understand that it builds my resilience. I take it slow. I get as much sleep as I can, and then I take it literally a step at a time every single day.
Nice. Very nice. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks so much
all
for
this
having
with
me.
us. Yeah. You've been listening to Going Interior, a Grand Junction Fire Department production. So this quote, I think, is perfect for the end of this talk, from author Anne Lamott. Almost everything will work if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Lindsay Mauer. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks.
How was
You
it?
did great.
Was it
That was
all right?
awesome. Yes. Thanks for joining us on Going Interior. I hope the ideas shared here help you to adapt to the challenges of your life and career. Please share and like this episode if you find it useful. It's been produced by Dirk Klingman and Ellis Thompson of the Grand Junction Fire Department. The special thanks to 970 West Studio for sharing their space, equipment, and expertise. Take care, and please join us again next week.